I came to this group. It was recommended to me by my brother-in-law, who attends St. Joe's. And he had recommended John Jennings, John Russert, and Dan Barber very highly. And when I came here, I was very happy I did, because not knowing how to do anything, they walked me through all the basic steps on what I needed to do and how I needed to prepare. Dan helped me with the resume, and coming here, I just got continual encouragement. John Jennings encouraged me to join Toastmasters to try to improve my speaking skills. And it proved to be very helpful, especially within interviews. I've been in sales my whole life and I can't shut up. But when you're in Toastmasters, you've got to give speeches of 5 to 7 minutes. You've got to learn how to condense. And that was very helpful in the interview process, because you can talk too long and talk yourself right out of contention. What advice I can give? I shotgunned it. I was on every single job board. I went to this group. I went to other networking groups, which is very important. The bigger your network, the better you're going to be in terms of finding a job. Something also that's very important today, and particularly for us who are mature job seekers, is a robust LinkedIn profile. Prospective employers are going to look at people in our age bracket, and one of the first tests is how technically savvy are you. I took my time off and took 4 classes at CLC just to hone up on some of my Microsoft Office skills. Took a advanced Excel class, pivot tables, VLOOKUP, all that good stuff, which you have to know how to do now. The LinkedIn profile, as it turned out, was what got me noticed, and it really surprised me. I was pretty much at the point of despair. I'd finished second too many times, which is, is first loser, and it got to be discouraging. And every time that I did miss the job, even though I had some internal contacts helping me, I would inquire of them afterwards and follow up. Well, they gave it to a 35-year-old, they gave it to a 38-year-old, and that became a very common refrain, and it got discouraging. The mistake that I made, and one of the pieces of advice I would give to all of you, I was stubborn and thought that my skill sets would attract large employers, particularly being in a sales field, looking for sales management positions. I found out that I was, chasing rabbits there. Look at and hone in on small to mid-sized privately held companies. Those are the places where your experience and your skills are valued, and they don't necessarily look at age. It's not an automatic throw in the reject pile like it may be at a large Fortune 500 company. I started doing that, and what ended up happening with me, it's more than ironic. This is a faith-based organization, and that's one of the reasons I came here, because I have a strong faith like the individuals running this group do. In December, the church I attend, I am kind of the designated substitute preacher when our preacher's out of town or whatever. He contracted a serious case of this nasty flu that went around on December 5th. He coughed so violently, he paralyzed his vocal cords and couldn't speak a word for 9 weeks. Well, you know what the default? You're not working. Have at it, Tom. I spent full-time 2 months preparing speaking, and I'm talking about 30 to 40-minute presentations. I did 12 of them. And I spent all week. It was a full-time job. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing all this work for you. Where's my help? And that's not a good thing to do, I know, but it's human nature. Our preacher finally got, with voice therapy and medications, he began to be able to speak again in mid-January. I got a call on January 8th from a recruiter out of nowhere and said, could you talk to our the head of our office here? There's an opportunity. I said, sure. So she called me and described the company. It was a small company, only 7 years from startup, in a growing industry, and the person who was basically running it themselves was just buried and needed help. I went and interviewed. It is a ultra premium pet food company. I'm talking the $4 a pound variety. When I went there, and what was nice, it was not a corporate interview session. I didn't answer one stupid behavioral interview question. It was a conversation. I sat down and had a conversation with this woman who's extremely bright running this company. And what it was appealing about this company is she donates 3.5% of all of her profits up to a maximum of 15% to animal rescue, foster, and adoption groups. My daughter has been involved in animal rescue, foster, and adoption in St. Louis for 10 years. 3-4 minutes into the interview, I mentioned that. The entire conversation changed. The entire conversation changed. And it just became a discussion after that. And I, based on the job description I pointed out to her, I don't necessarily have some of these experiences you're looking for. And I was a little worried after that first interview, and the recruiter who called me, and I've been warned about working with recruiters, there's good ones and bad ones. This one, I can't say enough positive about. They're the most professional people I've ever dealt with. Excellent. They would contact me within 2 hours after every interview, after talking to the owner of the company. They would get her input, then they'd ask me for my input, then they'd share what she had said to me. And after the first interview, the recruiter said, "You already have a leg up on your competition." And I said, "Why is that? If I might ask, what was it about me that excited her?" She said, very simply, she thinks you get it. You understand her mission, you understand her passion, and she thinks you'd be a good cultural fit. Dan and John, both John, have talked about this incessantly, and maybe to you when I was coming to this group. It comes down to many times likability and cultural fit, and not necessarily all of the qualifications. Because she basically said, I can show you that stuff. It came down to that factor. So all I can say after my story is encourage you to keep at it, don't give up. It can get very frustrating, and I've been very down, I've been up, it's a roller coaster ride, but it finally paid off, and I start Monday, so it's an exciting opportunity. It can be a lot of work, but that'll be a welcome relief after 2 years of fixing the house and painting and fixing the deck. I've had it with that. So thank you very much. And thank you. I wanted to personally thank Dan, John, and I'm sorry I can't thank John Russert personally.
Great story. Great story. We, again, like to begin our sessions with success stories, and we'll continue. For those of you in the last couple of weeks, we'd like to know what successes you may have. It could be not necessarily getting a job, but maybe landing a good interview, having a good network contact, and so ever. It's going to be hard to beat that one. But so I open the floor up to anybody who has had a success that would like to talk about it.
It wasn't success, but after the 5-day workshop that I took, I went to One North Genesee today because I thought Banner Employment was going to be there. So I went there and put my 2 quarters in the parking meter and went inside, and apparently they just didn't show up. But while I was there, there were 2 other companies hiring. One was for a janitorial position, and I'm like, I could do that at my mom's house, But the other one was for a landscape company. And I saw, I think it was on Indeed, maybe Scott Byron is hiring for an office manager type position, but they are looking for more specific green experiences. But the company that was at the job center today, I left, after talking to the lady, and I was like, I already paid. So I turned around, went back in, and for no other reason but to practice the 30-second elevator speech that you're supposed to give to, anybody that you meet at these job hiring events. So I did that, and the first thing I said was, I don't have any other qualifications you're hiring for today, but, and I gave him my 30-second speech, and he was a real nice guy, and he said, well, you know, it's very possible that within the next 2 weeks, I am going to be looking for an office manager. So I was like, oh, well. So then I made the incredible mistake of, you know, mentioning Scott Byron, who is their competition. I'm like, it's like, why can't I just shut my mouth, you know? So when I got home, I looked up this company, and they're huge as well. They've been awarded all kinds of accolades and whatnot. So I actually called this guy and said, you know, I sent you the email saying, you know, thank you for your time and follow up. But I just wanted to call and let you know that I did explore your company on the internet, and I'm completely impressed and would love to touch base with you again in 2 weeks. So it's nothing more, you know, it may turn into nothing, but it's just like, it's incredible how unnerving it is to interview and just to open up and to, you know, when to not say the wrong thing, and I don't know. So I did that. That to me was the big step.
I think so, and, you know, and you're out there, you know, I mean, you could have pulled back instead of going back in and talking about something, and now he'll remember you. But you said in, what, a couple of weeks he might have something, or well,
Yeah.
make sure you
So
follow up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I put it in my phone.
Make sure you follow up. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, well, let's see how you did on your final exam. Anybody? What's the first one?
Coach?
Coach. Coach. And the second one?
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee. And the third?
Pepsodent.
Yep, that's an old one. That's been around for
What
a
was it?
long time.
Pepsodent?
Oh, I knew it was a toothpaste.
How about the house that Ruth built?
Yankee Stadium.
All right.
Maybe Ruth.
Yeah, could be. Good to the last drop.
Folgers.
Maxwell.
See, I put Maxwell.
Maxwell House.
Is it Maxwell?
What is it?
Maxwell House.
Oh.
A little story about that. When my sister's 3 years older than I am, and I remember I was probably maybe in high school, and she was like a senior in high school or something. Started drinking coffee. Up in Wisconsin, you drank coffee at an early age, and she was in English. She loved English, and she loved words, and she fell in love with that phrase, good to the last drop. So she wrote to the company, right, to their corporate headquarters. And her only question was, what is wrong with the last drop? And she got, within 3 or 4 weeks, a package came to our house, addressed to her from Maxwell House, with about 4 cans of coffee and a little note from their marketing head saying, thanks for your question. Just to let you know, there is nothing wrong with the last drop. So again, their brand caught somebody's attention, and I remember, I'll never forget that. The next one. Mhm.
Timex.
And the next?
Hallmark.
Yep. How about this one?
Sherwin-Williams.
Yeah, it's very good.
I can't hear it.
Very good.
Sherwin-Williams.
That's not where you painted the house.
Yeah. You're in good health,
Deer.
hands with. Right. Breakfast of Champions. Nothing runs like a. Okay. Kadir. Built?
Ford.
All right.
Is it Ram or Ford?
Ford. Built Ford tough. What gets the stain out?
Tide.
Okay. Next one. And let's go places.
Toyota.
Yeah. How about the extra credit?
Kleenex.
Kleenex.
Okay, what about number 2?
Xerox.
Xerox. Outstanding. That, you've hit the branding jackpot when you could score in either of these last 2. Any company who's whose brand becomes the process unto itself, and someone says, do you have a Kleenex instead of do you have a tissue? You know your brand is.
And Band-Aids, too.
Is one.
Band-Aids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Band-Aids, yeah. So, and yeah, I'm gonna go Xerox this, right? You know, think of all the copy manufacturers who would love to have that kind of a reputation. Yes?
My dad worked for IBM for 32 years, and we never said Xerox. It was always photocopy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Loyal to the end. Okay, let's get started on some stuff. John, again, can you help me?
So let's have some baby words and some baby words. That's what I thought. I was like, I have no idea what
Okay.
John Beach in
My hand is here.
Hi, Phil. Right. Forget the top, where it talks a little bit about the dates and so forth. This was a cover kind of page from something we had done last year as well, and those in fact were the dates. For March, obviously, it's wrong because we're talking about something that's completely different on March 21st. The next session is really integrating all of these competency discussions and value proposition discussions and so forth with into a resume presentation. So that's then fleshes out the whole 3 or 4 months of discussions around everything from what do I want to do to the introspective, assessment of personality and so forth, an analysis of what you really need and what you're looking for, competencies, value proposition, and how that then translates into the resume, the discussions you have, the interview discussions, and all those kinds of things. So we're going to talk tonight about how competencies and experience are translated into that differentiated value proposition, just as Maxwell House has taken a brand and has, in the mind of many people, differentiated it because people will remember them. And perhaps at the end, the summer comes, basketball season's over, and people will still, high school seniors will say, I want to go Loyola. I remember that school, and I remember Sister Jean, and it must be a great place to go to school. So anything that differentiates you, we'll be talking about tonight. So we'll discuss the brands that describe the value proposition. Core competencies, for those of you who are here last, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the core competencies. I think you'll be able to take some of that information if you weren't here and incorporate it into the resume. Talk about a little bit about brands and a value proposition. And then your brand and your value proposition as it differentiates you and into the resume. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about brands, competencies, value propositions, and they'll all get tangled up into one thing. But that, at the end of the day, is going to be a good thing because that's what is going to make your future employer remember you. As Tom said, you want them to remember you as someone who gets it, So, the reason we do this is there's a lot of competition out there, as many of you who have been in the process for a while understand, and so forth. So there has to be a reason to hire you. Sure, your resume can get you maybe an interview, maybe you got a screening interview, you got through that screening interview on the telephone, or maybe your job was selected through some automated process because you had plenty of keywords. But the question is, at some point, you're going to have to sit down across the desk or across the table from a decision maker and say, okay, here's what I got. So you may get in the door, but what we want to do is what will keep you in the door and keep you in the mind of the people that you're talking about. So what will be the impact of your resume or your discussion regarding the discussion of competencies and the illustration of competencies as included in your resume, or included in cover letters too. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the resume. Your cover letter often is just as important as your resume. We'll discuss that certainly in the next, at the next session. How long will that hiring manager, who probably will see maybe 3 people today, 2 people tomorrow, maybe 3 more, 4 people the next day, how long will they remember you? Will they remember you an hour after you've walked out the door? Will they remember you a week from now? Or will they remember that you're the one of the people that they want to call back when they're finished with the preliminary screening interviews? How well do you communicate these competencies? Both interviews and in your networking content. So some of you have described some of the networking events that you've had, and those are just as important because they can lead then to another introduction, to another introduction. So you need to be including within your messages over a cup of coffee at Starbucks with networking contacts about your competencies, about your value proposition that you offer, so that that person feels confident in moving your name forward, maybe to his or her colleagues, or when they see something that might be of interest, they think of you. Because everybody's busy, and so, yeah, you can have a good 15 or 20-minute conversation, you can have a good 45-minute interview, but it has to have a lasting effect. It has to have that Maxwell House effect, or that runs like a deer effect. Somebody who's going to remember you when the need arises. The other thing that's important to talk about is the polish and how memorable you are as a professional, and a lot about your presence. You know, how did you show up? Did you show up with a lot of energy? Your body language, your ability to speak, your ability to articulate the kinds of things that you've done, and to listen very carefully to the questions and answer, be spot on with respect to answers to those kinds of questions. So, for our discussion tonight in terms of trying to improve your personal branding and your as you introduce yourself into the marketplace, it's really just an alignment issue, alignment of who you are and what you can offer and what value you add, and to be remembered. Because every one of you are competent, every one of you are experienced in a certain functional specialty or within the job title. And so, you know, you're all competent. But what makes you unique in terms of ability to add value? Because there's no reason to pay you a paycheck unless you can add value. Not just do the job, but add value. By the way, I mean, this is just open discussion, interrupt, talk, if you have questions, comments, issues, on anything we're talking about, please raise your hand and talk, you know. We'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards, and there will be some, I've given you some things that will be, some homework assignments that you could, you know, do on your own, but we won't take up a lot of time, doing it here. So, let's talk a little bit about your unique brand or value proposition. Describe the terms. John, do you need a handout at all?
Yeah.
That's, should be, yeah, that should be it. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Sorry for being late,
No problem.
talking to a reference.
Well, that could be a key conversation. So, a brand is a term or a design or a symbol that distinguishes one product from another. So we're not going to be talking so much about a brand as we are the value proposition. But the value proposition is your proactive commitment. It's a promise of results the employer is going to receive by hiring you. Your job title and your past experience, and job titles that seem to be aligned with or fit the job that you're looking for, I mean, that's the minimal requirement that you have to have probably to get into the job. But the resume, the discussion has to imply or state very, very upfront that you offer a commitment of the results a person can receive. I'll show you a number of examples of what that might look like as we go along. It's usually stated in writing. It's in the resume. Certainly, your value proposition should be very clear in your resume and your networking brief or the handbill that you have. By the way, how many people have a handbill that they use for networking? Good. That is something that we will be covering in an independent discussion. But get out ahead of the process. Make sure you have a handbill. And you can go to the library, there's all kinds of references. Google it, and you'll find how it's constructed and so forth. But that's the key answer to the question of how can I help you when you're meeting with a contact, is to be able not only to have a resume that they could walk away with, but the handbill really digs into here's what I'm looking for, here's how I add value, here are the target companies I'm looking for, and so forth. We won't discuss that tonight. It talks about the gifts. Again, in earlier sessions, we looked at all the competencies, all the gifts that you have, the specific business benefits, and then that create this compelling rationale for hiring you. Tom just talked about, there was a point in the conversation he had with this hiring decision maker that had nothing to do with his resume, when you think about it. But all of a sudden, because he was able to, through the conversation itself, through the interview process, describe a potential value add, she changed the dialogue from this check off the boxes on experience to, you know what, I could see how you could add value. The way you interview, the way you prepare, the way you, the discussion we're having is interesting. It's compelling enough for me to say, I don't care about some of these other requirements that I had on the job description. I want to talk more about you because, you're offering something that I find very compelling. That's where you want to get. Now, it's nice if it's in the resume, but it's clearly carries from the resume into the interview process. A resume will never get you a job. It will only get you an interview. That's about as much as we're gonna say about resumes tonight. But he was able to strongly convey his belief and his message in this interview process. This is what I can bring to your organization. It's the compelling reason to select you instead of somebody else. There's a basic assumption that I always like to talk about, because so in these kinds of, in all the people that I talk with through networking or in my previous day job before I actually retired, clients would come back and say, man, I interviewed for this job, it's perfect. I was perfect for this job. Here are the 6, 7 of the top qualifying or qualifications in the job description. These are the criteria that they're looking for. I have experience and accomplishments on each one of those things. I was perfect, but I didn't get the job. I wonder why. So my assumption, and I think all of our assumptions should be around this, is that, yeah, you probably don't even apply for jobs for which you're not qualified. So we can make that assumption, right? You're applying for jobs that you're qualified for. At least you're sure 90% of the qualifications that you have. But where this I was perfect thing comes into play is, so is everybody else. Everybody else goes into that when they put that, when they hit the send button and they send out that email with they assume they are perfect. But 100 other people maybe who saw that job posting are also doing the same, and they're assuming they're perfect. And for sake of argument, they are, Why would they apply for a job that they're not qualified for? So the basic assumption is you're qualified for every job that you have. Just realize that there are other potential candidates, and so are they. So the difference ultimately is going to be, what differentiating feature do they bring to the table that will help give you leverage around the interview and landing that job. So your challenge is to translate the competencies that we talked about last week, or last session, and align them into a unique branding statement or a value proposition that will make people remember you. If you go to the next page, it should be a discussion of the competencies described or applied. Is that what you're seeing? Okay, good. Because I had a couple of these things out of order. I've listed at the top a number of competencies or experiences, we can call them. Again, this experience, competencies, skills, all of that is really comes together. But that's a list of some of them, certainly not all of them. So apply for a job, you have whatever is the appropriate skill or competency, and that's clear in your resume. One of the things that you should then try to do, one of the next steps, is to take those competencies that you have, that we talked about last week and that we've been really talking about for about 4 weeks, actually, four of the last sessions, and be able to talk about them as to how those competencies are applied. It's one thing to be highly analytical, but what does that look like? So how can you describe your analytical capabilities or your leadership capabilities to someone? And here's just some examples, not not every kind of example you could imagine. But here's some examples of the application of some of those competencies. This first one is ability to manage complex projects requiring critical prioritization, resolution of challenging issues, and attention to detail. Multitasking capability, able to learn rapidly, apply new skills. And again, you could read for yourself. Achieves sales goals through a focus on customer service and building rapport, trust, and lasting relationships. So again, being able to talk about those kinds of things starts taking that competency, gives it an application that is, again, embedded in your resume, embedded in every discussion that you have, whether it be a coffee break or a coffee contact with somebody that's in your network, or whether it be in a formal interview process. Because it's one thing to say, I have the skill, it's another thing then to be able to have a little story about how that is applied. So the answer is yes, and let me give you an example of how that's applied. We'll have a little bit more on that in additional handout. Actually, I've got some additional information on that. So again, you can read through at your leisure, a number of different things. Some of them may give you some ideas of how it might apply to you. So in the value, so now we're going to get to kind of the main topic, the value proposition and the kind of the basics of value proposition. The resume, the messages contain a very clear statement. You are the candidate, and you solve problems. So there's a relevancy to the person that you're visiting with. They understand the relevancy of that has to be within your value proposition. Your value proposition really has to describe very specific benefits. What is the value? What is the quantified value of the results that you have created? And your value is differentiated in some respect. Why should the employee buy you? Why should the employee remember you? Why should the people watching the NCAA tournament remember Loyola? Well, they're a unique team. They have Sister Jean. It's very unique. Your language needs to speak the needs of the employer, as stated in the job description or in the job title. Now, for those of you who weren't here last session, we talked about the notion of going into the job description and looking at that job description, Googling your job description, looking up print job descriptions that you can find, and using this word cloud approach to seeing how many times, if you have 10 job descriptions for a financial analyst, how many times does a word appear in those things? And the more it appears, the bigger this word cloud gets. Again, it's that, what's the
Wordle is one of them,
Yeah,
and,
Wordle. Yeah, you might want to write this down because.
Tag Crowd,
Tag Crowd,
TAGCROWD,
yeah, Tag Crowd, right.
tagcrowd.
Doesn't that one have an advantage of giving you the counting? One of them has a count for the number of occurrences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this,
Yeah, And
You
what it
get something
does
like this,
is-
and so leadership shows up 11 times, and build shows up 7 times, and
Yeah, so what you can do, you can do this manually, you can do it using some of these documents, but if you look at 10 descriptions of your job title, you will find that there are some words that show up more than other words. And if you're seeing one word, or one descriptor show up far more than the other, it's obvious that that's valued by the employers, having that skill, having that competency. You've got to make sure, when you go back and look at your resume, that it's clear that you have that word sprinkled in your resume where appropriate. We're not saying put in words, just put in words, but where appropriate, make sure that word is in there, so it resonates with the person reading your resume. It's also a word that you use to describe yourself, that you describe in the interview, and describe, or maybe it's something that you pull out and especially earmark in your cover message. Because if the marketplace is seeing that word, that skill, that competency as being highly valued, you want to make sure that you're using that same kind of language. So making sure that you're using the language of the position requirements that you're searching for is very important. Any questions on this? Because this is a really important part of getting your message put together.
So-
Both your cover letters as well as your resume.
So there's software that you can put a bunch of job descriptions in and it tells you what the keywords are? Or what this is?
Well, yeah, there are, but you can just Google the job title you're looking for.
Just Google a bunch of
Or one's close to it, it doesn't have to be just that, but just look at them all, you know? I mean, that's a manual way of doing it, but using this other technology, it'll walk you through how to do that. And then it gives you a graphic display of the words by size, you
In the
know?
job description that you need to have in your
Yeah.
resume.
It's an interesting way to go, so,
Hey,
it's
Dan?
a way to check, yes.
There's another tool called jobscan.co, C-O, instead of com.
Okay.
Jobscan.co, and you could input the full job description in one box and input your resume, and then they'll tell you what matches and what doesn't match,
Yeah,
and that'll
yeah,
spit
it'd
that
be
out.
like the next step, right?
Right.
yeah,
That's one by one, but just remember with jobscan.co, there's a limit to the number of times you can do that for free. 5, thank you. Recent 5-step.
so that's why you come to this thing, there's all kind of people, smart people in this room who know a lot about these kind of ways, and, so it's, but it's extremely important because, again, you have to create a brand that's readily purchased on the outside, because you want to be bought, right?
So it sounds like, I picked up on something, it sounds like cover letters are still a thing that still get used.
I think they're critical. I think they're
An
critical.
actual cover letter, like, you're talking like old school, right, on paper that you send them in the mail, or?
Well, I mean, it's an email
Okay,
message, it's your
all right.
email message with your resume attached, typically.
So, yeah, so
Typically.
email. Gotcha.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, old school works in some cases, especially at very high levels. If you're, again, I can give you a couple of examples of people who have gone directly to the chairman of the board of the company through
I mean, I can see in today's marketplace, like, with all the emails that people read, and they have to get an email with your stuff on it, I mean, it's 1 in 150 emails in a day.
yeah.
The
How
other-
many envelopes do they open a day?
The other very effective thing is a written thank you note.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't get them anymore. And
Yeah.
it's
Actual
separate,
written one.
the actual written one.
In the
You-
mail?
Yeah, you can go to Vistaprint and get cards with your name printed at the top. You just handwrite a thank you note after an interview to everyone. And the amount of those they get are rare, and that can separate you from the pack.
Yeah, and I mean, these are all key elements, but we'll talk a little bit about that in the resume prep thing next week or next time, whatever it is. But yeah, to me, I'll answer one of the test questions for the next test I give up, is the cover letter is the third page of the resume. Yeah, two-page resume and a cover letter. The cover letter is in fact part of the resume, but it's what you pull out of the resume for that particular instance. We'll talk about the merits of having more than one resume, but the point is, if you have a good resume, what you can do is, you don't need to reconstruct a resume every time you respond to a job. What you do is put the differentiating information you want for that particular situation in the cover message, and pull out of your resume those areas where you want them to focus on as it relates to that job. Again, it's a subject for another session, but it's a great question. Yeah, critical, it's critical. In fact, some recruiters won't look at a resume unless there's a cover letter. Say, why? Especially in a corporate setting. The question is, why is this person sending me a resume? If it isn't obvious, but why are they saying it? That would be a good question. That goes in the trash can. I want to look at one who's saying, here's why I'm writing to you, here's why I specifically am interested in your company, here's why I'd like to set up some time to discuss an exploratory discussion, just to look at opportunities. And that'll get some traction. The other stuff won't. Okay. From that analysis of your competencies, below are examples of the value propositions that are inserted in my job seekers in resumes, or in their handbills, or in their LinkedIn profiles. And again, we talked about LinkedIn before a little bit, and how it needs to be. Well, Tom talked about how effective it is to make sure that your resume and your experiences align very, very carefully into that LinkedIn document as well, because LinkedIn is again critical. And Maureen, don't let me forget that you talked about it. There's going to be a session on LinkedIn that Maureen wants to talk about. There's some brand statements that talk about, and they usually infer I am, I have, or this highly valued, desired experience and competency. So let's just read a couple of these as we get on the line here. The strategy executive says, I articulate a broad vision and plans for business growth in challenging circumstances, particularly in emerging technology markets and turnaround environments. So if he is, for someone who is in an emerging technology business or is in a turnaround situation, as is a lot of companies these days, especially some of the larger companies who are constantly in somewhat of a turnaround situation, this can be an expression of value that he would bring to that organization were they to have a conversation with him. For this administrative assistant, she or he keeps my boss on time, on schedule, all across the globe. The next one, the one that I think is one of the better ones is International Sales Director. This is somebody from our local area, International Sales Director, who says I could ask for the order in 4 languages. How's that for a value proposition? Do you have to say a lot more than that to start your conversation? Hi, I'm Joe. I could ask for the order in 4 languages. Let's talk. While it's not quite that simple, far more complex than that actually. This person was seldom, if ever, turned down for at least an initial interview for global sales roles. And on it goes. There are a number of ones, some of them may be somewhat applicable to you, but all they're doing is taking what they feel is value that they can add and changing it into a statement that could be hopefully memorable and have value associated with it that would make somebody want to talk to them. All your goal is in this search is to get somebody who will have a serious conversation about what you'd like to do and how you'd like to have things work out. On the second page of that, this is from a client that we had at my company. He was a very, very experienced, competent guy, a little edgy. I mean, he was really edgy. He was almost abrasive at times, you know.
That's fine.
But
I got fired.
that's good. But he had this track record that was unbelievable in terms of success. And this is the one that is the third from the end of the second page on that. It says, his mantra was, I take companies from last place to first place. Now, he was highly specialized as an executive in operations at pretty high level. And all he wanted to do was get into troubled jobs. He didn't want a job that was smooth, you know, and so forth. His only goal in this whole process was to find a company that really needed somebody to do a turnaround. It wasn't Hacksaw Al. I mean, it wasn't that abrasive, and he was no Carl Icahn, but he was a very solid operational guy. And what you got when you hired him was a guy who could promise to do that and deliver on that promise, the value proposition, albeit maybe a little bit abrasively, a little bit of an edge maybe in his operating style and so forth. That was part of his package, I guess. But he got a little bit better than I looked at that. But people wanted to get things done, he got them done. And so that was his value proposition, and that was really kind of an opener that he got in terms of some of his correspondence and some of his calls. I mean, he could have a real quick conversation with people who didn't want that kind of a style, but it really resonated with people who say, yeah, our company's got serious problems, we really need a quick turnaround. You may be the guy that can do it, because you've done it before. But if he would have been laid back and said, gee, I've had some really great experience in turning around companies and so forth, yeah, he wouldn't have generated the kind of enthusiasm for talking to him that he did by using that kind of a pretty bold statement. There are other statements embedded in there, some of which are maybe helpful for you and some of which may not be. I'm going to also, I brought with me some, some other ones that are similar to this. John, I'm ask you one more time to help you. Again, that you can add to the pile here. There's three of them. I guess that's it.
For the new people here, we're sending around a sign-up sheet, and at the end is a bunch of space you can put in your name and your email. What that'll do for you is if you sign up the weekend before we have a meeting, I'll send out a reminder and kind of talk about what it's about. Then you'll get a list of the people that have been here before, where they worked, people that decided to share it, what kind of functional jobs they are looking for. So it's a good networking tool. And then if you sign up this time, the next time, you'll just have to check a box when you come around to, we'll get you on the list, so. If you have any questions, let me know.
Okay,
I'll roll it over there.
Thank you.
we're on the home stretch here. Let's look at a couple of examples of how this may then be embedded into the resume. We're kind of getting the first peek at resume prep and all of that for next session, but let's talk about that in a little bit. Obviously, this is just the kind of the heading that has been inserted in some resumes. It's then obviously the core of the resume itself follows in each of these instances, but I want to give you a little bit of flavor of what some of these value propositions might look like as they were applied within a resume situation. So let's talk about Dan Eglinton. And you can look, you probably will see then some of the both competencies, experience, and values interwoven in some of the statements that describe him, and then his actual work experience, his job title, his duties and responsibilities, and his accomplishment statements will follow that. But he drives peak performance, he's collaborative, he implements territory management best practices, he focuses on excellence in customer relationship services. So this isn't just idle chatter that he thought might look good on a resume. This comes from an analysis of Vice President of Sales job specs, both that were Googled, as well as 4 or 5 that we had on file in our shop for sales vice presidents. And those words were the words that were most, or phrases were the words that were most often used for vice presidents of sales. So we're not suggesting that if you don't have those competencies, or if you don't feel self-described in that manner, that you should just insert them, because it seems to be the thing to do. You have to live up to it, right? So I'm not suggesting in any way that you alter resumes or that you put in language in a resume that you can't actually, in the core of your resume, be able to back up and justify. So you have to defend every statement that you make about yourself. So in this case, the words, it took a while to actually come up with those words, and those words are also defended very, very, in many instances in the resume itself. Kathleen O'Brien, she's the lady that has more than 15 years of experience keeping executives on schedule, on time, all across the globe, which was, she had a really difficult time being able to describe a value proposition. She was very self-effacing. She said, I'm an administrative assistant. I handle the phone, I handle projects, I do all kinds of things, and so forth. But I can't say that I have a value that would be in any way differentiated from probably everybody else that does the same kind of work I do. I said, come on, think about it. said, why don't you go back and ask your boss? So she did. She said, you know, her former boss, she was involved in a restructuring that her boss and a whole bunch of people left the organization. I said, go back to your boss. And he went back, she said, I'm really having trouble trying to differentiate myself in the marketplace from every other senior administrative assistant that is out looking for the same kind of a job. And he said, Kathleen, you know, I highly valued you. You kept me on schedule and on time all around the globe. He said all around the world. We changed, we thought globe would sound better than the world. So that was a little wordsmithing, but that's exactly what his reaction. So we worked from that premise, and you know, that created the value proposition for her. But a little bit different in the approach to the resume. There were some bullet points on things that maybe again came from this search of what administrative assistants do and so forth. And these words, prioritizing tasks, project administration, interpersonal communication skills, and so forth. Integrity came up often. It's probably the most oft used word in that analysis of those job descriptions. And people, I think somebody said the other day, and he said, well, isn't that just assume that you'd have integrity? No, it's not. Yeah. So we've just gone through this horrendous Illinois political campaign. You see a lot of integrity? If that were part of the job description, who'd win? You know? So, again, in our day of being able to maintain confidentiality around proprietary information, around all kinds of things, integrity is a big deal. So in her case, she said, that's got to be in there. And of course, she has it. And then the other things were actually competencies more than value. Things such as the software and platform kind of competency that she had. I mean, they were basically described as such. So you can't say there was a value proposition, but it was important, more in a keyword kind of approach. Time growth. Reduces costs, creates efficiencies, applies best practice management, pays attention to details, has solid analytical negotiation, problem-solving skills, has Lean and Six Sigma, improves productivity, reduces costs, and so forth. Reducing cost and productivity improvement probably were the most oft mentioned things in job descriptions for this particular job. Happened to be logistics, distribution center management, and so forth. That I'll probably use his resume as kind of an example in a couple of weeks. Scott Hoffmeister. His value proposition really is ensures growth in global businesses. He's identified as a product innovation marketing executive, but his value proposition around that is to ensure growth in global businesses from a strategic perspective, delivering business growth, achieving aggressive corporate goals, and so forth. Again, those are kind of supplementary kinds of descriptors around ensuring growth in global businesses, so it creates the semblance of a value proposition. Not pure, but close enough, okay? And then finally, James Ledger. He defines a market strategy, aligns business resources, and leads teams to achieve aggressive goals. A lot of companies are looking for people like that. He has leadership experience strengthening the P&L and market positions, and he builds and develops industry-leading global teams. So again, these are not, you know, runs like a deer kinds of things. These are, you know, so it's not like they're way out there and creating a kind of cutesy approach to a value proposition. It's merely taking what the marketplace is asking for in terms of job specs by executive recruiters, as well as job postings in both company sites as well as in Indeed, Ladders, and some of these other resources, and is extracting from that those key words, those key phrases that imply an ability to add value, and making sure that those words are embedded in the resume, but also embedded in, those are kind of statements that can be pulled out and extrapolated into a statement within a cover message too, especially. Because the value, the cover message is actually, can be a spot to develop more of the value proposition. Because that's the short, quick, first thing that a person reads. You know, here's how in other words, the cover message says, here's how I add value, I have the kind of experience that you're looking for, let's talk. I mean, that's essentially what the cover message is. But it leads with, here's how I can add value to your organization. Then the next couple of pages are really kind of homework assignments. It's up to you to whether you want to do them or not, but the first one talks about, you know, I don't know if there's more than one there or not, but the first one is the competency thing. Go back and kind of review your competencies, what you really have to offer in the context of tonight's conversation, and then create a value proposition as a result of that, and then be able, you know, I had this as a work for, or as an exercise we could do here, but, you know, I'm not sure it's worth everybody's time to try to do it here. It takes some thought, and I just would have to take it home and work at it by yourself and so forth. And then the second part is, let's see, I had another piece of this. Oh yeah, being able to introduce yourself at networking meetings like this, or when you're introducing yourself, maybe even at the preliminary part of a networking contact meeting. Create your own 30-second introduction. I've given you kind of an example. Derek Boland, you know, so if we were asking people to introduce themselves, it would be good to have just this much of a snippet of information so as we could perhaps help them identify people that they, or organizations that they might be, it might make sense for them to be in touch with. And he embeds in the first sentence kind of or the first paragraph, a notion that he's an IT leader that adds value by applying emerging technology to create best cost, best practice IT solutions. Not necessarily the most expensive, but the best, you get the best cost IT solution from him, and that's how he adds value in this instance. And then he talks a little bit about here's what he's looking for, and then he'd like to share his handbill or resume with those of you who are at this meeting, and perhaps you have some ideas on what he can, we might be able to talk with in terms of colleagues or contacts that you might have. So that's it. So these two, feel, you know, take them home, look at them, and see if there's any value for you to create some additional language for your resume or for your cover messages and so forth. If it gives you any ideas that could strengthen those messages and create this kind of value proposition about who you are And what is your promise, what is your commitment to being able to deliver should that person, and you get together for an interview discussion. So again, it's all part of the process. The resume in and of itself will not get you the resume, or the resume will not get you anything more than an interview, will never get you the job. But that's the end of the game, right, is to get the interview. All you do is want a chance to get in front of somebody and improve the opportunity to provide more information that's highly targeted to what that person needs. So, questions, issues, discussion around any or all of this? Crystal clear, huh?
Unfortunately, I feel a little bit not in tune with the elevator speech thing. What is the elevator?
That's not the elevator speech. The elevator speech is, I would suggest is I term it the verbal resume. You know, you've got the resume, it's a two-page, for lack of, argument, it's a two-page resume, and it really lists from the beginning, from current to where you started work, where you were educated. And in many of the instances, you'll have the person that you're going to be talking with or that you want to meet may even have that. So I mean, you don't want to regurgitate that. But what I refer to as a verbal resume, a little bit more elaborate maybe than the elevator speech, is about a 2-minute discussion. And it begins with your value proposition, who you are. I mean, the first part of that could be the first paragraph of your verbal resume. And then, the verbal resume serves the purpose of answering the question, so tell me about yourself. You know, they have your resume, or they get to it. They don't want a blow by blow description of everything you've ever done from the time you started work. Now, what they want to know is, I want to know about you. So your value proposition is a good place to start with. Well, here's what happened, here's how I add value. And then the second paragraph, the second part of that discussion is, let me tell you a little bit about myself. You know, I graduated from Loyola University, and a degree in whatever, was in a number of jobs early in my career that gave me some experience in this, and this. More recently, because again, we want to focus on the last 8 to 10 years, more recently I've done this, and this. And so you're at present day now. The thing that makes this an interesting, I think that can be very, very helpful is then so you've talked about the good news, now the bad news, okay? You want to keep the bad news to yourself? Yeah, of course you do. You don't want to keep, We suggest you bring up the reason for leaving, the reason for you being currently in the marketplace. Don't have that hiring manager, don't have the HR person say, well, why are you here? Why did you leave? What happened at Allstate? Or, whatever it might be. If you lead with that, then your credibility goes sky high. Here's what happened at Acme Metal Products Company. We had a major reorganization. Unfortunately, my job, along with many others, was eliminated, and so I'm currently actively looking for whatever you're looking for. And I'm, looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to you having a discussion with you, or if you're in a network, I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So it's as simple as that. Here's who I am in terms of a somewhat of a value proposition. An IT specialist who you can add value through the application of best cost IT practices. Here's a little bit about me personally. Kind of staging your career. Start with kind of your educational background and training. And then let me tell you what happened most recently, through this consolidation of jobs and functions and Acme United Products, my job along with others was eliminated. And unfortunately, I find myself in the marketplace, but I'm excited to be able to sit down and talk with you today. Let's talk. So it takes the last part of that, which people find uncomfortable at times, but if you script out, it'll be okay. I guarantee you it'll be okay. Because unless somebody has done something felonious, every recruiter, every hiring manager has heard every reason for leaving. And they'll finally say, oh yeah, I get it. But they hear your organization and say, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, I've been through that too. I know 500 other people have been through that. So it's not something that's going to be something that's going to make the discussion any less valuable than it would have been otherwise. What happens if it isn't mentioned or if it isn't broached, all the time you're having that conversation, and I'm a reformed HR person myself, the HR person is very suspicious of what happened. Was he fired? Did he hit somebody? It's barring a felonious reason, just about any reason for leaving is very acceptable. And if you choose to bring it up, it's totally acceptable because it has to be true. It has to be true to the extent it is true, not necessarily the entire unvarnished truth, but the truth. It's something that would be certainly supported by reference checks and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, good question.
Good question for Tom.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a lot of time working in your house and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you had like the work history. Did they look at that? And then how do you kind of, how did you get to cover that work history?
Well, what I was able,
space?
I was able to do, in the industry I was in, I was contacted by a few people and did some limited consulting work. So I was able just to list a job title, almost a faux title, but I was doing consulting work for people, so I listed that to bridge the gap.
But another thing I heard in your conversation too, that again, can help in that discussion, the gap, filling in the gap, that's what you're talking about, right? He also said, hey, by the way, not only did I do consulting, but this is a great time to go back and I really honed up some of my software skills.
I took 5 classes
Yeah.
at CLC.
And all the person is hearing is, not only did he close the gap, but man, he's adding greater value now because he knows more and so forth. So again, go on the offensive, don't be defensive about the gap. There's something that you could really talk about. Another, a way of looking at it also is, to the answer to that question is, I've looked at a pretty broad range of opportunities. A number were just not really a close enough fit for either of us, and so I walked away. But I've been, very discriminating because it's very important that the next job be a great fit for me. That's all I need to hear. That's all I need to hear. And sometimes that takes time and just collapses. You had a question?
Do you include any of that in your cover letter if you've been out for a while as to the gap? Like I've been out technically since December of 16. But in that interim, I stayed care of my mom, doing, odds and ends of things to help her out and fix up her house. But it's not really related to what I had been doing. So how do I incorporate that into the picture?
It's a great question. I remember a couple of years ago, we had an attendee here who had that exact same problem. A roughly 18-month to 24-month gap. And he had been almost totally responsible for caring for an severely elderly parent, severely ill elderly parent, I should say, and virtually full-time, took full-time attention, and he was the only sibling of the family that was close enough to do it. He had a sister, I think, out in California, so that she wasn't able to help. But he was on a job search, so he searched at the same time. But he was getting increasingly uncomfortable with having to talk about the gap. And so what we came up with, to answer your point, should you put it in the cover letter, we said, in this case, I think maybe we should. And basically, it was very simple. Let's go back to 2016, where that the case. It says something to the effect, and again, I'm not being very good extemporaneously here in this regard, but he said something to the effect of, you know, since in 2016, my company went through this reorganization and my job was eliminated. I since have been on almost a full-time basis taking care of my father, who was severely ill, and handling family obligations in that regard. I'm now at a point where I'm free to get back into the marketplace and seek a full-time opportunity. And most people, and his success rate went way up as a result. So again, there's a plausible reason for everything. And so long as you don't withdraw from it and hide it and not respond to it, people are very accepting of a reasonable explanation for somebody being wherever they are.
To your point, Dan, caring for an elderly ill parent will also, in many people, engender a level of respect and admiration for you, and it says something about your character, and it can actually be a positive.
Yeah, I mean, he really, in his verbal conversations, that was probably the gist of it as far as anything that was in a cover letter. But in his verbal conversation, he emphasized it. He says, I was so happy I was able to do it. And man, that changed the dialogue.
Yeah.
It's character.
You're telling them who you are without, you know, putting it on paper.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Talk about somebody who has values, integrity, all kinds of things. I mean, it conjures up all kinds of things, right? And so what was a stumbling block in the search he turned it into an asset that went away. I mean, it wasn't the competency, it wasn't anything. It was an explanation of a situation that he was in that he now felt comfortable talking about, and blew away any of the otherwise negative
He put that in his cover letter?
That was
kind of
the more expanded thing
Right,
was
right.
more in his verbal conversation.
Okay.
Especially being able
But he
to sit
did.
face to face and say, you know, this is what happened, and man, in retrospect, I'm really glad I was able to help. You know, he didn't. That wasn't
Right.
excessive in the covering
No,
message.
yeah.
The covering message would say, I've been doing this since this reorganization, reason for leaving, reorganization, and I'm now at a point where I can return back into the market on a full-time basis. So people said, yeah, that stuff happens, you know, that stuff happens. Yes?
Regarding cover letters, sometimes I send the cover letter as an email with my resume as the attachment. And I think that unless I'm going through a portal, that's typically what I do. So my question is, number one, is that a good idea? Number two, do I treat it like an email and use the informal, there was a job listing going around that was kind of informal. Or do I go formal and have an inside address and start out with date, address,
No.
dear so-and-so?
No.
No.
In today's the marketplace today is pretty accepting of an email with an attachment.
Okay, thank you.
In those cases where that's a problem, a trick that I was told, and it worked for me one time, when sometimes they won't open an attachment take your resume, your Word document, is it 2 pages, I'm assuming?
Yeah,
All right, continue the 3rd page, and your cover letter's the 3rd page, then it just goes out as a single, not 2 separate.
and they won't just stop reading
That,
at
at
the end
least
and
that's
say-
one way of getting it in.
Yeah,
But there's really, I mean, if somebody has posted something, they expect a response. They're expecting responses, and I would say 90% of the responses they're gonna get has been,
Right there, just put your resume in.
I think
Is that
you
the
say put the
question?
cover letter third or something?
well,
That was a special
I-
it's
situation.
really 2 steps. Go ahead and apply. Apply the way they want you to apply. The next step is go find the hiring manager and apply directly.
Oh, try to find them on LinkedIn or something.
Yeah.
Or even Facebook.
Anyway, yeah. Yeah, I mean, usually there, you can find second, or first or second connections that you may have in LinkedIn. Have worked there, used to work there, might have an inkling of who that hiring manager might be, et cetera. David, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Would you just relate the most recent events that happened to you in terms of following up on that kind of opening?
Yeah, sure. So I had applied online for a director of compliance position with a company here in Chicago metro market. And like most online applications, they get lost on someone's desk or they get lost somewhere in the system. Particularly when they use applicant tracking systems to sort of decompress your resume into a form that can be machine readable, right? So I took a different approach. I actually used LinkedIn to identify an executive who I thought was still working at the company. Turns out he wasn't, but we connected with each other through LinkedIn and we had a conversation. And he was able to introduce me to an individual in the company who knew the hiring manager. And the individual that he introduced me to took my resume and gave it to the hiring manager. And the hiring manager read it, and the hiring manager called in the talent acquisition director and said, "We want to talk to David, make that happen." So then the next step was a telephone screening interview. And that was about 45 minutes to make sure that I am who I say I am, that my resume is an accurate reflection of me, that there's a fit, both professionally and culturally. And once that was established through the telephone screening interview, then they invited me in for in-person interviews, which are actually going to take place tomorrow morning. So I'm going to be meeting with 3 senior execs tomorrow. But you can see how the process unfolded, right? It was not as simple as just submitting something online through Brass Ring and waiting for somebody to reach out to you. They almost never do. You really need to do what Dan is saying and take that second approach where you find the hiring manager and get them to take action by directing HR to do their job and get you in there so that they can talk to you. And Dan and I talked about this the other day.
Right.
If you have
HR
a
is the
pile-
black hole.
Yeah, if you have a pile of 50 resumes you're trying to get through, and you're relying on a computer system to read it and cleanse it for you, sort of data cleansing that takes it down to maybe 10 or 12, it's an unmanageable task, even in itself. And then you have to read it, and then decide which candidates you're actually going to invite in. Much better if you can get to the hiring manager and they can short cycle that process for you by getting you onto the desk of the HR person who then can facilitate the process.
That's absolutely true. I was working a contract recruiting position at a hospital system. I was filling in for someone on maternity leave, and while I was there, the organization, multi-hospital organization, brought in about 13 more contract recruiters and said, "We have 32,000 applications in the ATS, the applicant tracking system, that nobody has ever touched." Wrap your brain around that, 32,000. So they divided up the positions among the various hospitals, among the various recruiters, and said, just go in there and call the first 3. call the first three. So you may have carefully crafted a resume and been waiting and that, and it was never gonna happen. You were never gonna get that call. So to your point about going around.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it happens at every level too. I mean, my stepson, he's been philandering for like 9 months and he can't even get a job at Best Buy. It's like, well, I will fill out an application online. Like,
Yeah,
did you call anybody?
they do have a store.
You know?
just can't-
Yeah.
not need to. But
Hey, Dan,
yeah,
can I-
I mean,
can I add one more
it's,
point to
it's.
that?
Pardon?
Can I add one more point to that?
Certainly, certainly.
So think of it this way. You have absolutely nothing to lose
Right.
and everything to gain by making that contact, whether it's through LinkedIn, a telephone call. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't feel afraid. Do it. Because if you don't do it for yourself, nobody else will do it for you. You have to take charge of your search that way and do it very professionally. But do that, take that action and do that for yourself.
It's like, yeah, it's like you want to be remembered, right? You talk about being remembered. You can't be remembered if they never meet you.
Exactly.
You know,
That's
so-
right. It's, it has to be very frustrating to be sending out resume to Monster, to Career Builder, to all these wonderful places that are gonna get you a job, right? Yeah, they don't know you, never will know you, don't care about you, they care about the process and the fee that gets attached to it by customers who use their system. Networking will always be the number one resource to use in order to get a job. Dave's case, just through the simple LinkedIn process or through other professional associations or wherever it might be, said, well, here's somebody that works there. I'll call him. He's in a position where he might know who could logically be the hiring manager for this job. Could be the general counsel, could be, maybe that's in another, the job may be compliance, and could even be in marketing, could be in quality regulatory, who knows where it is. And rather than go on this wild goose chase, I'm just gonna call a guy. He says, well, I think, probably, this is the guy that you should be talking to. I'll introduce you. I'll tell him you may give him a call or send him your resume. In this case, he sent him your resume addresses. Then goes to talent acquisition manager, says, this guy really meets our requirements, get him in. The talent acquisition manager isn't saying, well, my job is to figure this all out and look at all these resumes and give you the best resumes. The talent manager saying, thank God I don't have to go through all these resumes, let's get this guy in, let's hope he's the guy. Then I can throw the rest of these resumes away, which I would like to do in the first place. So it's, you said it well, you have to take charge. Great discussion. Other questions?
Well, I don't have a question, but I have a comment, and it's directed to anybody. There's a position that I heard about through a friend. He's just looking for, short-term contract position for somebody to put together some budgets and kind of clean up some operational areas. It's with a not-for-profit organization, just a contract basis, may last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is. So if you're interested, let me know.
Thank you.
Good, and I got a couple here. One is from Comfort Keepers. I think they're looking for people who are interested in doing home health care. So if you're interested in that, becoming a caregiver with Comfort Keepers, I've got contact here.
There's a flyer out there, over there on the table too.
Oh, okay.
Do you have to have any kind of certification for that or anything?
I don't believe you do.
I'm not sure, you probably have to have some qualifications or get bonded, be able to be bonded and so forth.
Those are typically non-medical home care versus home health. Home health is different. Home health would be your CNAs who have to be certified,
Yeah.
your physical therapists, your occupational therapists, your RNs, but the non-medical home care agencies, they do take people that don't have any particular,
Yeah, I think,
and those are typically, you know, not full-time positions, typically, you know, maybe it's 10 to 2, you know, 3 to 6, that kind of thing.
It's a Grace Lake company, I think their contact information is there, and you can, you just, if you're interested, if you want to find out more about it, or if you have a friend who might be interested in it, give them a call.
yeah, and there's another one here, CareNet DuPage. They're looking for a writing assistant. It's part-time, it's temporary. An individual who will write warm, informative content for our client blog. Target audience is men and women facing unplanned pregnancies, seeking facts regarding their options. Position includes researching aspects and writing interesting posts that inform and draw clients into further connection with us. In-office entry-level position, weekday availability, typically 9 to 5, flexible scheduling, provides office support, writing is described above. So if you're interested in that, that's here. Take a look at that.
And then Maureen, would you talk a little bit about
Yeah, I wanted to share that there's going to be a workforce development. Lake County Job Center is putting on a LinkedIn workshop on March 27th from 4 to 6 p.m. And this is over at the University Center of Lake County in Grays Lake. Is anybody familiar with University Center? Consortium of colleges, about 20 colleges. Their students are typically older, the 20s to the 40s, working and either working on their undergrad or a graduate or a professional development certificate. So the way this started out was they approached us and wanted us to do some things for their students. They have about 800 students there, so we're doing some things for their students, but they ended up opening the LinkedIn workshop to the public. So if you're interested in that, because that is specifically using LinkedIn for job search. So that's really specific. So if anybody's interested, let me know and I will send you a link so that you can register. We do want people to register so that we make sure we have adequate seating for everybody. And Tom, because you were the one who mentioned the importance of LinkedIn. And by the way, thank you for your story that you shared with us tonight. It was awesome. And I thought all your advice was right on, really spot on, so thanks for that.
The LinkedIn thing, and Dan probably concur with this, over 60% of the recruiters are using LinkedIn now in their searches, and that's where it becomes real important. And no longer is it keywords, it's skills. You have to have skills sprinkled throughout the profile, and it becomes a game that you have to play. It really has become a game. Now, what some recruiters, I'm talking about not just, retained recruiters, I'm talking about those who are in the companies looking for people. They will now filter out any LinkedIn profile that doesn't have over 500 connections. They'll filter out any LinkedIn profile that doesn't have at least 3 recommendations. I mean, it's getting to that point. So having a robust LinkedIn profile, I had somebody help me write it professionally, and I went to all of his seminars, and using all of his tips and recrafting it is what got me noticed.
Who was it that you worked with?
Bill Bixler, Bruce Bixler.
Bruce Bixler, yeah.
He's excellent.
I just deleted about 50 of my LinkedIn connections. I didn't think I would ever need, but you're saying just having them on there as connections is good. Huh?
Yeah.
Well,
It's a trigger.
right. It's a filter that the recruiters put in now, and what that does is they're just trying to eliminate getting 10,000 and getting it down to 5,000 immediately. I mean, it's a game, and that's.
But again, if we're targeting smaller companies, that's not gonna be as big of an issue.
It's not as important.
Right. So anyway, the 327 LinkedIn, the speaker is Bruce Bennett. He's awesome. I've heard him speak before. He actually will be speaking to us here in a few months to the Employment Ministry. If you need to get started on LinkedIn, the Career Resource Center on April 17th at 7 p.m. is having a LinkedIn Getting Started.
Is that Ernie?
Pardon?
Is that Ernie Catco?
No, that is David
Oh.
O'Brien.
But Ernie has one going this Friday, March
If
23rd.
you don't have one at all, those guys are good to get you started on.
Right.
And that's also at the Career Resource Center. So careerresourcecenter.org/events get you the,
What's the Ernie one?
Friday, the 23rd at 10 o'clock, 10 to 12. LinkedIn Steps Beyond the Profile, registration required.
Okay, so that would not be your basic.
No, that's the next step.
Because you need to find, if you're just starting out, you need to find one that's
Yeah, okay,
more
the right
basic.
level.
Because LinkedIn can be very, very complicated and it also changes,
Yeah.
all the time. Even the people who present on it get a little bit crazy. So that was all I just wanted to share.
Thank you, thanks. The hour has arrived, very quickly. Thanks again for your participation, and the next couple of weeks we'll be doing resume prep, how all of this manifests itself in a full-fledged resume.
What industry are you from? What industry? Like what kind of?
I was in HR with, in the healthcare field with American Hospital Supply, Baxter, and Caremark. And have for the last 20 years, I've been a career coach with a company called Robinson Wilson, which is an outplacement and executive coaching.
Working for American Hospital Supply and then accident and Parish.
Yeah, well, it wasn't started, I mean, we took a business from Baxter, something as Caremark, which is now CVS Health.
But he was on the hospital side.
Yeah.
Hi, Tom.
John what?
Tom Booth.
My dad.
Ray
Just started this process.
He was on hospital supply division.
Yeah, he was there for like 45
Yeah.
He knows the exact
Loved it too,
technologies
all
and
that.
James. And I really honestly, I thought
It
it
was,
was
it was
a
the
great job.
American Hospital Supply was
Except
the
I really did.
greatest company that I ever worked for.
I thought that was
I was
it.
walking with
Because
his
I
friends
had,
for
I
meals
had,
for some exercise.
I survived that,
Oh, I
but
like that.
So I'm seeing a doctor tomorrow to get
cultural
I had
challenge.
15 years of product line.
Good.
Check it out, let's see what happens.
So he's retired.
Yeah, he's retired.
Oh, beautiful.
You got something going.
That's not what I wanted to hear.
Hi,
They did one.
did you just get your foot?
I wouldn't have written it all out.
I couldn't find it. Unfortunately,
About he wanted to do. He was well aware of this.
that's what we talked about.
Once he tested the validation.
So,
I'm sure it's one team wide. They want to put it out before their program. They gave us to make it. And if you had certain eye, you want to and he agreed that our measurement was right. And so I sent him in my stuff. And my process form, and the layout, and non-conformance to you got this. I don't think
This is the
like, medical parts, I'm like,
you want to steal your folder?
can't carry your parts. Does it happen every day? I don't know. Maybe it happens more than I think. I try to operate with a little bit of integrity. That's the first thing I do. I go to my boss. He wants us to report these good. You're not going to change it overnight. Maybe a tool. Your run rate is just like the next step after CPAP.
Okay.
Quality numbers that you can't send that out. Supervising
Great, thank you
Yeah,
for that.
get high, VP, director level. Okay, that's where I stand, and then just came, okay, what are we doing?